Hey there. We are going to continue on with our book, The Class. All right. Chapter 12 is about the student named Ethan. Date on this one, Monday, October 9th. Ethan checked for Rogan and Cole as soon as he walked into the cafeteria at lunchtime, making sure they were sitting at their usual table. Sometimes they got kicked over to another table by a group of 8th grade football players, but no, there they were, same old place, unwrapping their sandwiches. Cool. The trio of trouble needed to have a serious discussion about how they were going to track down whoever stole the things from Mrs. Herrera's special collection. The thief would be caught, and he or she would be brought to justice. Ethan waved at his friends with his lacrosse stick and started toward the table, stopping as always to say hi to Stephen, Ben, and Bart. Well, mostly he was saying hi to Stephen, who lived on Ethan's street and was kind of like family, like a cousin or something. They didn't hang out much anymore, and Stephen had never been a lot of fun to begin with. He had to pull him out of a book to get him to do anything. But family was family, and it was important to keep in touch. My mom said Mr. Rylant fell and broke his hip on Saturday, Ethan told Stephen as he waved his stick at Ben and Bart. She's going to start a meal train on signup.com. That sucks, Stephen said. I mean about Mr. Rylant. I saw him out walking Sporty Saturday morning. Ethan nodded. Yeah, Sporty's a good dog. He didn't have anything else to say, so he waved his stick again and headed over to his table. On the way, he passed Cammie and Carson sitting together, their Spanish books open in front of them. Normally, he wouldn't stop to talk, but Carson looked up as Ethan was right by their table and said, "Dude, pass me the ball." "No ball in this pocket, dog," Ethan said. "Not allowed in the cafeteria." "I'm surprised they let you carry that stick in here," Cammie said. And Ethan felt like telling her that he was surprised to see her hanging out with Carson Bennett instead of Becca Hobbs. But what did he care? He wasn't into labels anyway, all this who's popular, who's not. All he cared about was a stick in his hand and finding out who stole Mrs. Herrera's stuff. "So, have you heard any rumors about what happened to Mrs. H's special things?" he asked, tossing the stick from one hand to the other. "Because I think it sucks that there's like a thief in our classroom." Carson shrugged. "You got me, dude. I mean, it's not like any of it was worth anything, so why steal it?" Uh-oh, we have a little trouble here. "Yeah," Cammie agreed. "What's the motivation?" "Exactly," Carson said, nodding like Cammie had said something brilliant. "Motivation is key here." "Cool," Ethan said, and waved his stick at them before heading over to his table. Ethan was no stranger to bad news, like when he learned that Luke was going to play goalie on the Comets, the region's best lacrosse travel team in the 13 and under league. It had taken him a week to recover after he heard that. And when he saw the class list and realized he was going to have to put up with Henry Lloyd for another year, he'd eaten a whole bag of Fritos. Henry drove him crazy. Henry drove everybody crazy except for Stephen, who must have had special superpowers to put up with Henry as much as he did. But when he heard that Mrs. Herrera's signed copy of Hatchet had been stolen, it was like someone had punched Ethan in the gut. "A number of things from my special collection are missing, including my signed copy of Hatchet," Mrs. Herrera had announced Monday in language arts, right before lunch, and everybody in the class started going, What, at the same time. Not Ethan, though. It wasn't that he wasn't as shocked as everyone else. It was just that he thought he might cry. He loved Hatchet. He even sort of loved Mrs. Herrera. Not romantically, dude. Gross. But as a teacher, he didn't hate. Which, of course, meant she was about to get fired because that was the kind of luck Ethan seemed to be having lately. He finally got a teacher he actually liked, and it turned out she had some sort of criminal past. Ariana said she'd helped one of her students run away from home, that it was a big secret that a lot of people knew about, but that the court documents had been sealed. Rogan said there was no way that had happened, that Mrs. Herrera would have already been fired by now if it had. But why would Ariana make something like that up? Ethan was pretty sure that any day now Mrs. Herrera was going to get sacked, which was just his luck. Until this year, school had been a total waste of time. Ethan figured that everything they were trying to teach him was available 24/7 on his phone, so why should he bother learning it? Besides, he was going to be a professional lacrosse player, so he didn't actually need an education. But his mom kept making him go to school, day after boring day. And sometimes Ethan thought that if he had to sit in a stupid classroom one more second, he might explode, his blood and guts flying all over the place and splotching up the windows. But this school year finally got interesting. There was the weirdness with Becca and Petra for one thing. Not that they'd become friends or anything, but when they gave each other those bad haircuts like some sort of practical joke. Awesome. Next, there was a rumor that Stephen and Petra were going to the dance together. How freakishly cool is that? And Mrs. Herrera was a pretty decent teacher. She let them talk about sports for the first 5 minutes of homeroom class every Monday, and she was a big Cleveland Browns fan. Ethan wasn't, but he respected that she had a team. He thought her little football was cool, even though he'd had to look up who Jim Brown was. But that was okay, because Jim Brown was totally cool, and now Ethan knew all about him if the subject ever came up. And Mrs. Herrera wasn't too boring, at least not most of the time. Okay, sometimes when she was teaching stuff in language arts like verbs and how to write a good paragraph, things got kind of snoozy. But mostly, Ethan could halfway deal with her, and that was saying a lot. Maybe Ethan wouldn't have cared so much about somebody stealing Hatchet, but Hatchet was the only book he'd ever actually liked. Okay, loved. The book they'd been reading in Class Wonder was okay, but that Augie kid was way too strange. Not just his face, but his super annoying positive attitude. Brian and Hatchet, totally awesome. When I was in college studying to be a teacher, Gary Paulson came to a class I was taking in children's literature, Mrs. Herrera had told Ethan before handing him a copy of the book. Not her autographed copy, but the one from the Book Nook. He made a huge impression on me, not only as a writer, but as a human being who lived a fascinating and valuable life. I know you say you don't like to read, but I think you would enjoy this book. Then she told him a bunch of interesting stuff, like the fact that Gary Paulson was really into sled dog racing, and how some man had tried to kidnap him when he was a kid, so his mom beat the guy to death. After that, Ethan couldn't wait to start the book, a feeling he'd never had before in his life. Ethan read Hatchet in like 3 hours. It was awesome. And the next day he asked Mrs. Herrera if he could look at her autograph copy, and she'd let him. She didn't even say the usual teacher stuff like, be very careful, or are your hands clean? It was like she trusted him with it because she knew he'd totally gotten into the book. She knew he wasn't going to drop it or throw it across the room at Cole. So now he was bummed. In fact, Ethan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. When Mrs. Herrera had told the class that Hatchet had been stolen, his hand had shot into the air. We'll get Hatchet back for you, Mrs. Herrera, he'd practically shouted, his voice all emotional. We'll figure out who committed this crime. By we, he meant Rogan, Cole, and himself, the trio of trouble. It was Becca Hobbs, Rogan said as soon as Ethan sat down. Obviously, only Cole here disagrees with me. It's too obvious, argued Cole, who as always was drawing something in a sketchbook. I mean, at least now that Becca's gotten all strange. You know who I think did it? Ariana. Because she's the last person in the world you'd think would do it. Becca used to be that person, but now she's prime suspect numero uno. And the prime suspect never ends up being the one who's done the crime. He held up his drawing of Ariana wearing a burglar's mask and carrying a sack filled with stuff over her shoulder. Dude, nice, but what's Ariana's motive? Ethan asked, feeling like Sherlock Holmes and a little like Cammie Lovett. Why would she do it? She wants to get everyone to quit talking about how she called Becca, you know, Cole replied. And she knows, given how Becca's been acting lately, that everyone will think Becca did it. It's called subterfuge, my friend. Ethan shook his head. Nah, Ariana wouldn't risk it, because if she got caught, then she'd have to hand over her Queen of the Nice Girls crown. Yeah, I'm with Ethan here, Rogan said. Ariana's got too much to lose. So how about Petra? Old Petra, sure, Cole said. New Petra? I don't think so. Ethan agreed. It's like she traded in her meanness for, I don't know, something else. A space alien suit, Rogan supplied. The only reason I'd go to the middle school dance is to see her there with Stephen. They all cracked up at that. Hey, maybe Stephen didn't, Cole exclaimed, and they cracked up some more. Ethan looked over where Ariana, Elizabeth, and Adita were eating lunch. He didn't know why he and Rogan and Cole were mostly focused on girls when the thief was probably Henry. Henry was famous for doing dumb, super irritating things. Stealing Mrs. Herrera's favorite book would be right up his alley. But when his eyes landed on Ellie Barker, a new thought came to Ethan's brain. Ellie was kind of this mystery girl, always taking notes and hanging around different groups of people without actually joining in. Plus, she liked to read, and he'd seen her standing next to Mrs. Herrera's special collection of special things a lot. It was like she couldn't take her eyes off it. But why would Ellie steal a copy of Hatchet, or those 3 little kittens, including the one with the broken ear? What would she do with that picture of Mrs. Herrera's favorite teacher? None of it made sense to Ethan. Well, maybe stealing Hatchet, in spite of what Carson thought it was probably super valuable. But the other stuff was junk. Ellie Barker, Ethan nodded his head slowly. Other than Adita, she was the last person in the world who anyone would suspect. And that was why Ethan suspected her. Now all he had to do was figure out where she'd hidden the goods. Now all he had to do was spy on the spy. Hey guys, I've got an idea, he said to Rogan and Cole, and the trio of trouble leaned in and started to make a plan. That's the end of this chapter. So, a couple things, good predictions. What do you think their plan is to find out if Ellie is the one who stole this special stuff? And do you think it's Ellie, or do you think it's someone else? So we'll stop there for today.